Beautiful. So we're here today on another episode of Progressives for Trump. And today we plan to watch a certain section from the interview with JD Vance and then share some thoughts. And we are hoping to share more of our journey into supporting Trump because we were not born Trump supporters. Yeah, let's hop right into it.
I mean, just to remind people, you called Trump America's Hitler, and I'm sure you possibly don't like that quoted back at you at every single moment. And I read a really fascinating interview that you gave to the American Conservative in 2016,
Okay.
where you said Donald Trump, and I'm quoting here, he has dragged down our entire political conversation. He spent way too much time appealing to people's fears. Why do you feel more comfortable with his approach today?
Well, I think there are a few reasons. I mean, one is I was pretty optimistic right after Trump's election. So you sort of go back a little bit, the book really took off right before he was elected.
Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah, Hillbilly Elegy. And it had kind of like this second wind that was somehow even bigger than the first wind. And I remember I was doing all of these interviews, the night of the election. I think it was ABC where I spent most of that night. And I was talking to people sort of privately, but then of course I was going on TV. And the biggest takeaway that I had from that moment is that it was genuinely a shock to the senses for most of America's political and media class. They really were certain that he was going to lose. I mean, to be fair, I didn't think he was going to win. I thought he had a better chance than most people. But in the immediate aftermath, there was this sort of sense of, okay, well, we misunderstood something, we got something wrong. Maybe we should try to understand where this like underlying frustration and sense of grievance is in the population writ large. And that lasted for all of about a month. And then it was like very quickly, it was the academic studies that said that, well, Donald Trump's voters were not motivated by any sort of legitimate concern. They were only motivated by racism. And then, of course, the media kind of laundered that in to the mainstream discourse. And then, of course, there was the Russia, Russia, Russia cycle where it was, well, the only reason Donald Trump won is because he was like, collaborating with Vladimir Putin, which, even when I was anti-Trump, I thought that narrative was absurd. And I guess that what I slowly learned is that if you believe the American political culture is fundamentally healthy, but maybe biased towards the left, then Donald Trump is not the right solution to that problem. If, as I slowly developed a viewpoint, that the American political culture was like deeply diseased and the American media conversation had become so deranged that it couldn't even process the frustrations of a large share, maybe even a close to majority of the country, then when you say, well, I don't like Donald Trump's language, well, Donald Trump's language actually maybe makes a whole lot more sense if you assume that the institutions are much more corrupted than they were before. So the point that I got to was if Donald Trump didn't talk like this, and if Donald Trump wasn't going directly at the institutions, then he wouldn't be able to get anything done. And most importantly, he wouldn't be able to illustrate how broken the American political and media culture is right now. And so what I saw in 2016 as a fault of Donald Trump's, by 2018, 2019, I very much saw as an advantage.
That's interesting. So what I'm hearing you say is that
Yeah, there's much to share here. I'm curious what is moving for you, Luca.
Yeah, I'm really happy that Trump chose a VP that called him America's Hitler and then transitioned. And it's interesting with the word transition. I've heard some interviewers say that actually, like when they describe JD Vance as having transitioned, and they're like, oh, not that kind of transition.
Right.
But yeah, him having but it is as in some ways almost as significant, not quite, but it is a really significant transition to move from the Trump hating bubble into like being his running mate.
Right,
It's like
yeah.
a profound journey to go
Yeah.
through, especially from calling him America's Hitler. Yeah, and the other day I went on Twitter. I go on Twitter very rarely, but sometimes I do a deep dive just to like get the pulse. and like the main trending hashtag was like America's Hitler. And then I just clicked it. I was curious and I was looking through it. And then if you look at the like clips they select and stuff and like the frame, like from within that frame, it makes sense actually. Like I can see how people would have that perspective.
It wasn't a sarcastic hashtag. It was an
No, it was like,
satirical.
and you know, and that, like now because they're losing, and the Democrats because they're losing, and the whole like joy campaign is totally dead, and it's just like Hitler now.
Yeah, fuck optimism.
They're
right?
back to the Hitler thing. And really quick tangent. Interestingly, I think Trump realizes that that's a losing gambit, and so he just did the Madison Square Garden rally on the 85th anniversary of the Nazi rally there. Which is, you know, that's not a coincidence that he chose that timing. And I think he did it because he knew that then the left would like jump on that and be like, oh my God, look. And then it would just fuel that narrative because he realizes it's a losing narrative. Because when you see that narrative and then you see Trump and it's jarring, you know, when you especially with the Joe Rogan interview, like those juxtaposed. So yeah, that's a cool, interesting tangent. And then yeah, with the fascist thing, the way it lives in me is that basically exactly what he said. Like when you see the existing system as basically okay, and then Trump's coming in and wants to like, I mean, honestly, do a lot of damage to that system, right? That's undeniable, and also a lot of repairs to that system. But if you don't think it needs deep repair, then it looks like he wants to basically break the system's like very elaborate process of checks and balances. And the fact that politicians are caricatures, and J.D. Vance mentions that, I think, earlier in this interview, where he's like, you mentioned this in your post, she's like, but why are you sometimes happy and sometimes sad? And he's like, well, I'm a human being. But that's uncomfortable. Like, if you believe the system is fundamentally okay, needs improvement but is fundamentally okay, then someone who comes in and does not follow the script, right, the political correctness script and the politician script, that's terrifying. And it does feel like fascism because you're replacing this vast institutional framework with an individual's authority, which, like, you know, that is in some sense fascism. But this is what J.D. Vance went through and what I went through personally, and what I think many people who now support Trump went through, is because of what Trump was saying. It's like cognitive dissonance starts building, and it's like, and not even just cognitive dissonance, but also realizing a lot of things you've seen in your own life that you're almost gaslighting yourself about, of like, this entire system is like quite oppressive and quite corrupt, and the existing political class is just perpetuating it, but just putting a nice narrative that they're changing it on top. And Trump like exposed that in like a pretty drastic way. So when you start seeing that, and then it transitions from he's a fascist trying to destroy the system to he's a human being, he's a citizen in the society that has the power and influence because of his life path to enter that system and do damage to the parts that are deeply corrupted and that are you know, the whole America first, anti-America, like make America great again. The center of that is like the institutions that govern America have become anti-American, like anti the actual human beings in America, and instead are like captured by these ideologies that are like, have their own life. The ideology has its own life and is not attuned. And I think you see that now with like a lot of studies on gender transition surgery not being good are being like actively suppressed, which is kind of like shocking in a way that they're being suppressed. And again, not to say it's necessarily bad, but just that specific fact of the studies are being suppressed, which is like anti-human, you know. So you see that whole institutional frame being anti-human, and then Trump comes in and is doing what is needed given the corruption and the rot to fix it. And so that does genuinely look fascist if you think the system's okay. If it's not, he's like a hero who's, and honestly, I would say like a religious figure. I think he's the main religious figure of the current era, in the sense that he's the spearhead of a huge transition happening in society right now, from blind adherence to external authority, like the experts, and in economics in particular, with I think the Joe Rogan podcast, a lot of that was foreign policy and economics. He went really deep in that deconstruction of like the experts. Like if you just look, you don't even have to like, you can go the logical route, you know, like the evisceration of the manufacturing base and et cetera. There's a lot to be said, and like economic inequality and all these other things. But even just if you look around, like the feeling of like, society's not doing great and like the experts fucked up. They've had several decades now of like, the World Economic Forum, elite class running society, and it hasn't turned out very well at all for almost anyone. So just energetically, like there's already that like clash. And then Trump is just independently, like with tariffs, and with his foreign policy approach, like he flew to Iraq to ask the generals there what to do instead of listening to the Washington generals. And there's just literally hundreds, if not thousands, of examples now and throughout the 8-9 years that he's been in the political spotlight, where he like directs like you're wrong towards experts and backs it up in a way where you're like, like maybe they are wrong. Like that kind of makes sense actually. And that's huge. Like, and that's what that's doing. It feels like the mass shift in the whole population from this like kind of being stuck in this like liberal frame, and even deeper than that. I think even if we're going to really zoom out, I think even like all of Western metaphysics is transforming from the frame. This is getting you skip this if it's too much, but just to get into it because it does feel really important to this whole frame.
Important to roll
where the structure of all knowledge is like, and there's a lot of philosophy, like Heidegger in particular talks about this. The structure of all knowledge is I am a unity. I am a unity, and I am an ego. I'm an identity. Like I have an identity that's clear and contained and unitary, and I relate to the world from that, and all my knowledge has that structure in it. I am a subject that's observing object, and all knowledge is out of that. And we're in a transition now where that's breaking. We don't know what's coming out yet because we're like savages discovering for the first time like new knowledge. Like we don't know shit yet about it. But like when that breaks down and parts where like feeling all the parts in you and all the ways we're intrinsically interconnected with the people close to us in our society. And from there, like knowledge feels very different and is more true. Like that's more true. And so there's this huge transition happening where more and more everyone is realizing, and Trump is spearheading this in his very unique, weird way. Everyone is realizing like our existing structure of knowledge, even on a fundamental level, like doesn't actually track reality. And we can see that in the world around us. And it was like ripe for Trump to like actually name that and like go hard on that. And everyone's feeling it now. And we don't know what's coming out yet necessarily. And Trump is not the one to like build that alternative structure of knowledge. But he and to some extent a little bit in certain pieces, but mostly not. But he is breaking that existing metaphysics and that knowledge in such a uniquely like true, again, like with the tariffs and all these other things, like, or with NATO, questioning NATO, and with like his foreign policy decisions, you just see the evidence of it and you're like, holy, like, okay. Like it's actually, it makes sense logically to some extent. And it's in terms of, he's already had 4 years, it actually did do positive things. And that's huge. That's like this deeper, like long-term thing and I feel like especially with this interview, felt really big because he explicitly acknowledged these things, and the Joe Rogan interview, which I feel like just it went so deep in Trump's like connection to truth and how like tracked to reality it is. Like he literally just goes out there and talks to people and is like interfacing with the world instead of just being in this like ivory tower like theoretical statistical frame on reality. And so those two things feel like they really like. They feel like historical documents, these two. Like for me, they completed almost, or like brought to full fruition this thing that's been happening for years of the breaking of external disembodied authority, and below that, this I am a unit relating to the world as a coherent single closed unit. So on the authority level, and then below that, this like 1,000-year-old way of knowing are like are breaking in this really deep way. So yeah, I'll keep it at that for now. But I just the energy in the air feels like different for me after this plus Joe Rogan, and a few other pieces, but especially those two.
Interesting. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, thank you for that start. There is a lot that you covered in that. just exploring it at like varied levels, really. And
Yeah.
I think
Oh, actually, wait, I'm just going to add a few sentences of another level, which is postmodernism, because more people are familiar with that, maybe.
let's do that after.
Okay, cool. Maybe that's a lie.
Because, it's already, I think, a lot on the
Yeah.
metaphysical. So yeah. Yeah, there's a few things that come alive in me as I, take in your response and also this part of JD Vance's interview, which is, given my upbringing in a non-Western culture, I'm actually not that intrinsically rooted in that view of the world as an individual coherent unit relating to the world, which is an other, more inherently. Like, I've grown up with Western education, but my body and my culture and like the routines around me are from a very different worldview. Like, it doesn't have that separation of the individual unit from the rest. And it's interesting to hear you speak to that shift in Western metaphysics, because in a way I see it as an infusion of Eastern metaphysics into Western knowledge systems, which has been happening over the last like 80 years or so. Like, ever since like physics reached quantum physics, like there was this moment of like, oh shit, I think the Easterners probably knew some stuff about subjective truth. And then, it started the flower child era of the 60s, like the psychedelic exploration and whatnot, and more Eastern metaphysics. So there's a beautiful merger happening, and, so that itself is just glorious in my mind. Like, it's so beautiful that this is happening right now. So that is one piece. And then, even in this journey of like asking him, like repeatedly asking Vance, you said Trump was America's Hitler. Now you're like supporting him. Hence, you must be a bootlicker. Like, that is kind of the contracted frame that is often presented from the left. Like,
or you also want to be a fascist and you're trying to join in.
Like
I've
you're
seen that one
you
as
want
well.
to gain power or something. And there is very little room left for, you thought someone was bad before, then you had the open-heartedness, the spaciousness to hear them out, evaluate what they were saying time over time, and over time you realize, actually, no, you were wrong in your original judgment of them, and now you have switched over, and now you see the value of what they were bringing. And especially in these times where, like, a frame to which I relate to this is the repressed trauma frame. Like, I have personally experienced having a polar shift in like 2 months, going from no memories of sexual abuse to memories of sexual abuse. Like, that's such a significant shift. And I think there is a lot of like repressed trauma in humans today. And in a sense, Trump's way of like, and that repressed trauma in humans is also represented in the repressed rot in the bureaucratic systems that form the government today. And there is like a whole layer of numbing that prevents that rot from being like removed. And we have gotten very used to low quality political leaders. Like, like the question this lady asks at the beginning, where she's like, yeah, you sometimes are happy, sometimes are frustrated. And he says, yeah, that's because I'm human. Like, that reveals to me that we are so used to these puppet leaders who just parrot a narrative and like basically are just sticking to the script. So they don't never reveal their full dimensionality. Even if they reveal their background and their family, it's still like a part of a script. They're doing that in support of like this narrative of being, of a middle class background and whatnot. I won't get too much into that. But Trump, I see as like what is that thing where it's like a hammer that you hammer into the earth to break.
A drill?
Not a drill, it's like a jackhammer or something.
Oh, those things, yeah.
Right, you know what I mean? It's like when
is.
you're trying to break the concrete.
Right.
Like, Trump's energy has been that towards the numbness of the bureaucratic system that we have. Like, he's just like jackhammering it. And that system is reacting, saying like, oh, he's fascist. It's like that system is going to crumble, and the claims of fascism lobbed at Trump to me seem mostly to come from like this really fear-driven place. Like these career politicians who rely on politics for making money are going to have to find new jobs possibly. It's like if there's an influx of like successful business leaders who are entering politics, then the people who have been relying on, and they don't need to make money off politics, they're kind of actually serving the people through politics, and they have already like made their money on other ways, then the people who rely on politics for their bread and butter are going to get edged out, because they're in my mind, their motivation for fixing problems is a little there's like a little bit of a catch-22 situation, because if they were to actually fix a problem, then they can't make money off pitching that problem to the American people election after election. Whereas like people of a creative problem-solving orientation who have like executed that multiple times in the real world, in the business world, who are now hooked onto the joy one gets from tackling a hard problem, like coming up with a beautiful solution that is actually monetarily valuable. Like they are driven by that. Elon Musk starting like amazing ventures. He's like, he doesn't care about maintaining a problem for a long enough time so you can milk and make money out of it. Like he's like, they are a very different caliber humans, you know what I'm saying? And that's with the influx of those humans, the bureaucratic middlemen, and that's the other thing that was kept coming to me. Like Trump skips the middlemen, he's just going directly to the people and then telling the middlemen, the experts, like, hey, do a better job, like that's not what the people are saying, and you claim to be representing them. So these bureaucratic middlemen who are basically gatekeeping information, and their careers rely on gatekeeping that information, are going to get edged out, just like social media and YouTube is edging out mainstream media. And that's a beautiful thing. They should find like, anyone who's doing in the broader utopian vision of the world I have, like everyone is doing like their best, most glorious work every week, and like no one is like a wage laborer. And I'll claim it as a hyperbolic utopian vision. But it's good that these middlemen are getting edged out, and that's what they're afraid of when they say that, oh, fascism, like that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah.
Having said that, I
have so many thoughts.
Yeah,
on that.
yeah.
My brain's
I
gonna
also
explode,
want
so
to prompt that. I think it would be nice to reveal more of, like, I'm really very curious about hearing your journey from like, did you ever see Trump as America's Hitler?
And until 2020,
like what is the like that arc I want to bring out, and open to other responses that
cool.
are there.
So many thoughts in relation to that. I have some disagreements and also kind of open questions in relation to what you're saying. So one is, I think with the wage labor thing, I actually disagree with you, because I think we do need a lot of wage laborers to keep society functioning. Like it's really important. And I think it's more about like recovering the dignity in those jobs, because you're contributing to the world in a way. And if you're part of a well-functioning system, it does feel really meaningful. Like I drove Grubhub for like a few months when I needed some money a few years ago, and it actually felt really good. I mean, I wouldn't want to do it forever, me personally, that job, but it actually felt good because I'm part of this really large, well-structured system that's enabling me to like provide value to people. And I think Trump's like McDonald's thing was like really essential, actually. Did you hear about this or no? Where
I saw I saw like the video.
Yeah, where he worked at McDonald's. And yeah, that's really there was someone quoted the dude who's the can of soup. What's his Andy Warhol. There's a quote by Andy Warhol, like there's a huge PR opportunity wasted, and if presidents just did ordinary people's jobs, it would just like massively improve everyone's lives because it like brings dignity to those jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that McDonald's thing,
Mm-hmm.
it's like something about seeing Donald Trump in the McDonald's booth
Mm-hmm.
is like giving dignity to that job,
Yeah,
to those
beautiful.
kinds of jobs.
I love that.
And then of
frame,
course
yeah.
there's like, okay, it's controversial because McDonald's is a really shit company and stuff, but I think that wasn't the main point, and it's not the main energetic message that people receive from that. It's like, oh, there's dignity in all work as long as you're like contributing in some way to people's lives. And, so I feel like that's in kind of my amendment, I guess, to that utopia is
I take it, yeah.
wage
Yeah.
laborers have dignity.
Yeah.
And then two other things, I think with the middlemen, I think there is a value to having middlemen because especially when you have large systems and bureaucracies, you do need middlemen. But the question is, where do they come from? And this is a really interesting thing with ISIS being defeated. And Trump talks about this in the Joe Rogan episode a lot, which is his generals in Washington were telling him it's going to take 5 years. And he was like, no way. Like, what the fuck? We have, like, how is that possible? So he literally flew to Iraq in Air Force One, which is like quite dangerous to do. He didn't tell anyone. And just talked to the generals there. And they were like, yeah, we could defeat them in a few weeks. But the people above us, like, are not there. Like, we have to follow their orders, you know, and we can't like talk back to them. And so then Trump just did the strategy of the on the ground generals, and then ISIS was defeated in a few weeks.
Beautiful.
And then this is beyond the scope of this, but like product managers, like are those coders? Are they managers? There's like a lot of, it's a whole conversation. It's a really interesting one. And I do agree with you that middlemen shouldn't just be middlemen. Like middleman as a career doesn't make sense to me. Like as you've always been a middleman and you're trained to be a middleman. Doesn't make sense because you got to be like in touch with the thing that you're a middleman of. So ideally you would at least have spent like a good chunk of time there. And that's kind of like, you know, like the system of, which used to be how a lot of corporations were run, and now it's gotten like all like hollowed by business school vibes. But that used to be how corporations were run, is like they would source managers from within the company, like people who are actual employees, and then you actually feel the company and the product and everything about it. So, and same with bureaucracies. That feels like you do need bureaucracies to some extent. So it's not like let's get rid of them all, but how are they tracking the actual people that they're relating to? And then that's where you get into the argument that the federal government is intrinsically very bad at doing that because the scale is too large. There's too many layers removed, and smaller local governments are like more attuned to that. And then another thing, going earlier to what you were saying, is with the repressed trauma. That was really interesting, and also this like thought that people can't have profound changes. You know. And that's a thing that I remember this from my college days when I was at Princeton, which has this like energy that feels like what she's in as well, and what a lot of people that are like anti-Trump in the elite have, which is this like certainty that we've already figured out what needs to be done. And all we can do to contribute to human well-being is become part of that certainty. And not certainty in the sense that like everything is already good, right? It's the opposite. It's like, you know, we're suffering from like white supremacy and racism and colonialism. So it is very much like we needed to completely transform the system. But what the issue is and how to transform it is like already determined. And there's like an intellectual frame on it that's already true and has this like absolute energy to it. In the sense that if you're disagreeing with this frame, and this is another thing Trump has dismantled, which is like, you know, everyone just gets called a racist if they disagree at this point, to the point where the term racist has like lost all meaning.
Same with fascist.
Exactly. Not because there is such a thing as being racist and it's terrible, but racism 80% of the time is being thrown at people who are actually disagreeing with this frame on reality.
You wouldn't even believe the ridiculous stuff that I've encountered. Like I had a white friend send me a video of a person of color journalist, and the essence of the argument was, look, he's saying Trump is a racist, how do you not see it, or something. I'm like, do you not see how ass backwards it is? Like you're telling me that I can't think for myself, and so you're presenting this alternative like person of color because I'm darker skinned and he's darker skinned, so I should listen to his arguments. Like, how ass backwards can you be right now? And you're claiming Trump is a racist. Like, you are a fucking racist if you think I'm gonna listen to his argument just because he's also darker skin color. he's not even fucking Indian. Like that journalist was like Arab or Egyptian or something. I'm like,
Right.
who the fuck cares? And it's like, what are you doing? Do you not see what you're doing here, literally? Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a very like aggressive energy, and it has the same signature as the system that it's supposedly fighting, which is
Yeah.
for me the key, and which is why I feel like strongly in support of Trump, even from the perspective of like the continuation of postmodernism and deconstructionism of like our existing frame on the world, which on the surface is what a lot of the Democrat Party and like the general elite structures are doing. Like the frame is like colonialism, racism, white supremacy. We have to like deconstruct all of that and radically transform society and like liberation, like, right? That's what they're all saying, and it's what it's like looks like if you just look.
Yeah.
But then when you look, and especially now with Trump like slicing into it, when you like not just look but also attune to this, you know, like the jarringness that everyone at this point is in relation to all of this stuff, because as you were saying, like that drill is just fucking shooting through us all. When you attune to that, it's the same like absolute certain energy, and it like preserves the existing system. You know, most corporations are supporting the Democrats. Like fucking Dick Cheney is supporting the Democrats. You know, like biggest like institutional warmonger
Is he still
ever.
alive?
He is, yeah.
Okay.
So below the surface of like, oh, we are the continuation of postmodernism and deconstructionism.
Yeah.
It's actually the opposite. They've hijacked that
Yeah.
in order to preserve the system, so that everyone and there's so many people who are Democrats. You know, the actual people who are Democrats for the most part are like awesome people and really have a deep heart, and like they're participating in this because they care so deeply about the evolution of society and the liberation of oppressed peoples. And so do I, and so do you, and like I would say most people like are in that. But then the democratic system, like, and beyond that, the elite structures that be, obviously that energy is dangerous to them, and so the best way to basically redirect it so it's basically like flaccid, you know, can't do anything, is to like create a movement that looks like it's doing that, but is actually just strengthening the existing system.
Yeah, there is I was sharing this frame with a brother around like racism and anti-racism, which kind of relates to this, is that, you know, if you want to solve racism, become an anti-racist. And if I'm trying to become an anti-racist, the easiest thing for me to do is call out racism when I see it. And now I'm oriented to like finding, like, I want to be a good citizen. Being a good citizen means I should be an anti-racist. I'm going to look around and see and call out racism wherever I see it. I'm safe now. No one's going to call me a racist. You know, like that's kind of that's the energy that traps one into these movements. Like, and somehow paradoxically create situations where it's the same form, which is discrimination on the basis of race, that just goes on to the other side and like comes out. And this is actually where the whole trauma view or of things is so helpful, because in the internal family systems mechanism, like this is what protectors do. Like the protector within becomes the abuser outside. So it's like if I'm so like careful about like people lying to me or something, like if I'm like in this like traumatic state of like, oh my god, like just fear of fascism everywhere, like then actually I'm gonna become the fascist, you know, like
without realizing it.
Without realizing it. Like take the case of, you know, the state of Israel, which oh my god, like the Jewish everything is always, and you know, there is a good reason for them to feel that way, in the sense that all of the neighboring countries have basically decided they want to wipe out Israel. Like that's kind of the orientation. So there's good reason, but from that place, you know, never again genocide. You're basically like the collateral of the Israel-Palestine war is ridiculous. It's like, so, and it's that same thing, like never again like this, and now you're doing the same thing. So it's like that's just how
and it doesn't, when you're in it, it doesn't feel like you're doing the same thing, like, because you're in that, like, the feeling is that you're doing a good thing, and
Yeah.
you're like liberating from that negative energy when actually you end up perpetuating it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a crazy thing. Yeah.
Yeah. There was like a very, I mean, this is a slight side tangent, but I want to share it. Anyways, like in the second set of memories of repressed sexual abuse that I recovered, it was, my grandfather's friend, and he was sodomizing me from the front. And it's the first memory I recovered where I was looking at my perpetrator.
Oh my gosh.
And this was during like a mushroom ceremony. And
Whoa.
it's like I was witnessing him as the memory was being recovered, and he was shifting between like an angry old man, like contracted into the action of thrusting into me, and a child that was like weeping
Oh my
inside.
gosh.
Like it was such a wild experience to have. Like, and this is the reason I'm bringing this up, is because this is like, for me, this was like so abundantly clear that he had these wounds inside him, and those wounds gave into the protector inside him.
Yeah.
And eventually the protector ended up doing something very similar onto something that was so similar to the wound, and had complete disconnection from the wound. And the wound was also weeping inside him at the same time as he was inflicting like the same horror on me. Like he was likely raped too. That's why he had that wound. And it's like such a wild like experience for me, like, oh fuck, like this essence of the protector becoming the abuser, the protector of his rape now raping me. It's like that is the essence of what I see when I see, like when they call Trump populist. I'm like, Kamala Harris has been like waffling on her policies based on what she hears. Like Kamala Harris is literally the most populist candidate that exists. Like there is no first principle rooting in what she's promoting. She just like she's copied a bunch of Trump's policies. Her campaign is like copied a bunch of like Trump's sloganing that has been working. It's like, but if I'm first to accuse you, no one's gonna accuse me. It's that same thing. It's like if I become an anti-racist, and now I'm just spending all of my time calling out racism here, racism there, then the moment someone accuses me of racism, I'll be like, no, I'm anti-racist. What are you talking about? I called out racism 20 times last week. How many times did you call out racism? It's like, it's that delusion. It's truly like a delusion that you're doing good work, and it can come from a place of good heart. Like that's like the worst part of the delusion. It can come from a place of good heart, but an unclear mind that is unable to see clearly as to how one is contributing to what one claims to be the problem. Like that Daniel Pinchbeck essay that I wrote about on my Facebook post, where he talks about how all of these mind-controlled Trump supporters, he says this non-sarcastically. He says,
really,
put all of these mind-controlled Trump supporters into non-brainwashing camps. Like they need to be put in education camps to unbrainwash them. I'm like, are you fucking like, do you not see the ridicule in what you're presenting? Like you're basically presenting a mind control solution to a mind control problem. Like this is the definition of projection, it's like, so
yeah, dude, 100% all that. And that's like the loop of intergenerational trauma. Is like, it happens to you, and then the protector comes in and like perpetuates it pretty unconsciously onto the next generation. And breaking that is huge. And Trump is honestly an opportunity, I think, to break a lot of intergenerational trauma loops in a very like complex way. Like I think if it was easy, it would have been already done. So I think that's an important thing as well, with like you're saying, where like you have the heart intention, but then for it to like manifest in action that truly contributes, it's like you have to be humble, I think, in like the magnitude of what we're doing, and that no individual is really gonna be able to fully know that picture, and you can attune to the collective energy of what's happening. And also like there's just like nuance that requires you to just the word coming to me is like chill in a way, or have it, maybe the better way of putting it is like have enough spaciousness to be able to surrender to these like larger forces. Not surrender in like I'm giving up my agency, but in like I'm choosing to relate to this in a way where I'm like becoming part of a larger flow. And then related to that, also guilt and shame, and this is also in terms of my own journey in supporting Trump. right? So there's this core energy that so many people have, like deep, heartful desire to help other people. Like it's very intrinsically human urge. And then the way that the kind of left like the direction that the left takes that towards change is built on guilt and shame. Like you were saying, like you beautifully demonstrate with your body actually, like it's like, oh, like and there's this kind of deep down, like the white guilt phenomenon, there's this shame. And then there's like this self-soothing, not just self-soothing for yourself, but also given your like social circles, like this is almost like a necessary self-purging you have to do to like be accepted. So it's not only your own shame that you have to soothe, it's also your sense of belonging that requires this energy of I have to do these things in order to be like not be consumed by my shame. And there's like this is like the really dark, horrible side of I would say the left is like there's this very active encouragement of that shame energy and a like magnification of it. And that's dominator culture, that's patriarchy, that's whatever you want to, all these terms that are pointing towards this like oppressive, nasty system, like that guilt and shame being used to force you to be a good person.
Yeah.
That is literally that.
Yeah, it's like what kind of a black person are you if you vote for Trump?
Well, exactly. And you see it all over the
energy.
place. You see that energy. And when you start attuning to it, it starts becoming like shocking, honestly, like how often that gets pushed on.
Yeah.
And that feels like maybe the core like truth of that approach towards change is that it's not actually an approach towards change. It's a continuation of what's already been. Right, it's the opposite of Kamala Harris, is like unburdened by what has been. No, it's like we're continuing to be burdened by what has been energetically. We're just giving it a new skin, right, so that it can like adjust to people catching on. Oh, you're catching on, we'll throw a different skin on it. It's the same fucking energy. And Trump is no angel that's like floating down from heaven. That's like he's not like Jesus or something. Like he doesn't have that energy, but he is human. And he deeply cares, and he's like directly acting from deeply caring, and from his own relation to reality, and is not like shame tripping people towards supporting him. And I mean it's a whole longer story of like what he's doing instead, but just wanted to say that. And then in terms of my own relation to Trump. It's a huge journey. I think this is what I was saying with J.D. Vance. Like, it's a huge journey to go through that. If you start in he's America's Hitler, and even if you look at J.D. Vance like as a human being, like physically, like if you look his pictures from 2016 and now, you can really feel how his body and spirit has changed a lot. Because he was kind of like pudgy and like there was this like heaviness to him before, and now there's a lot. I mean, he's not like like a radiant like person like this, but he's definitely way more like self-connected and like open and standing in his own energy and values in a beautiful way.
I feel that.
Yeah. And it's been the same for me. I mean, not that I look like him necessarily in the past, but it was similar where I was much more dominated by my shame energy, like most people in society, because of this, like that's how society operates to a large extent, is like the self-purging of shame is like how you become a contributing citizen in the current structure. So I was very much in that, and it took until the 2020 debate with Joe Biden, and I literally was shaking on the. I was like convulsing on the ground like during the debate, which was I was like, what's going on right now?
This is specific moments in that.
It was just it was like a gradual build up. I was like first there were like slight tremors, and then it kind of built up.
And would you say when you started watching the debate, you were pro Biden?
I was like confused. I was definitely still anti-Trump.
Yeah.
But I was confused. I was no longer like it was no longer like tight,
Did you totally feel that he would be Hitler, like literally Hitler, at any point, or no?
I didn't put it that way because I feel like I had more like nuance in how I was relating to the phenomenon.
Yeah.
And he never looked to me like he was wanting to be Hitler. Like Hitler killed 6 million Jews. Like Trump is not even remotely like.
Yeah,
like the distance of him from Hitler is like huge.
But one could argue that Hitler in 1934 did not appear as if he was.
Are you kidding me? Dude, Mein Kampf like lays it all out.
In 1934?
Yeah. I mean, I forget when he wrote it, but it was before he came to power.
I see.
And he's like hates the Jews in that.
It's like clear in that.
Okay. Yeah.
I wasn't.
In a way that's different. Like Trump is like he doesn't hate immigrants as like he doesn't think they're just like don't deserve to exist.
Right.
He just doesn't want them in the U.S., which
Right.
is very different
Different,
from
yeah.
intrinsically hating these people.
Yeah, there is, this contraction that has happened to all of these words, and I partly attribute it to the internet and social media making it easier for people to issue threats and not follow through. Like, I think it is a lot. We live in a culture where, like, lately when I hear someone say, I received a death threat, do you mean someone said something mean to you in a tweet? In one tweet? Like, that's the question that comes to me. And I think death threats sent by a postal mail that land in your, where there is like a lot more work that one needs to do to
Right.
give someone a death threat, in my mind, are more serious than one tweet that says, yeah, I'm gonna fucking kill you for saying this. Because I think the internet has just created a space for people to just purge all of the frustration they hold inside them. And that contraction of what it means to receive a threat, what it means to be offended, like, it's all gotten very contracted, that
Right.
that then floats into fascism. Because now if in a random drunk spree on Twitter, I tell 5 people I'm going to kill them, there's 5 death threats that have been issued, and I can see in my mind that can snowball into, like, it can kind of reduce the seriousness of a genocide then, or
Right,
like
right.
because the value of a death threat itself has reduced in a way.
Yeah.
And so then it's just easier for people to, like, hear something like throw immigrants out of the country, similar to Hitler started by wanting to throw Jews out of Germany. Oh, we all see where this is going now. Like, it's next step is clearly concentration camp for immigrants. Like, and I think that partly this space that social media offers for people to just express without any repercussions. There's a lot more of that now than before 20 years ago. It makes these labels very contracted in a way, and just reduces the weight of a word like fascist, or
Right.
a word like gonna be a dictator.
Yeah, I think part of that is also when you're receiving lots of little tweets. Like they're all fragments, and they're all coming from people with different ways of relating to all those words.
Right.
When you're reading a book or even an essay, it's like all those words are written by one person
Right.
in a specific frame.
Right.
And so it preserves the sharpness of the words more. Whereas if you're reading like 300 tweets, like all the words start just like getting like this, like it gets little.
And there's like a personal anecdote on that. The same brother who presented to me a better person of color that I should perhaps consider emulating,
Right.
was also sent me a post about this American guy in a motorboat with like Nazi flags, and he's like, who's supporting Trump, and he goes, the brother shared a caption saying, an actual Nazi supporting Trump, how can you tolerate this? I'm like, do you know what an actual Nazi is? Someone who was involved in Germany. Like,
Right.
Is that dude, just because he's like waving the Nazi flag, does that make him an actual Nazi? It doesn't. There's a
Right.
distinction between the Nazis in Germany who were in power and who like orchestrated concentration camps, and this dude who's waving a Nazi flag. It's like me wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt and you being like an actual Cuban revolutionary. No.
Right.
I just like how the bloke looks, I'm wearing
Right,
it. I
yeah.
might say like I'm not, it's like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of this contraction happening in society.
And there's also the difference between one supporter dude, or maybe many, but that's definitely like a very small minority, and the actual guy himself. Like he is not waving a Nazi flag,
Right.
and like whoever the fuck wants to could be like, I'm supporting Trump, and
Right.
look, here's a Nazi flag, but that it doesn't even touch Trump.
Right.
To have a supporter be doing
Yeah.
that necessarily.
And-
If it's all his supporters, like it would probably influence him for sure. But it's this is the first I've ever heard of a Nazi like supporting Trump. And
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
you must have heard of that from. I mean, in 2016 there were many like white supremacist organizations that had originally come out in support of.
yeah, but that's what I'm saying is it's like a minority, and it's not like if Trump was like I'm a white supremacist. You know, like obviously that would be very
Yeah.
different. But like Trump being something and then it's the same with us. We're progressives. You know, like Trump is not a progressive. But just because we're progressives, like let's say progressive was a bad thing, just because like we're supporting Trump, it might inform something about that person, but it doesn't necessarily directly reflect on that person.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's the support goes this direction,
Yeah.
and except at scale, it's the person is not responding to like specific support
Yeah.
groups. They are responding to larger majority things though. I don't know. That's getting kind of iffy. I don't know if I agree with what I'm saying in that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
Because
also
it's true. He does respond. If you know, politicians do respond to what people want. So
Yeah, it's. I mean, this is a tricky piece for me still, partly because, there is this whole
I also
wolf.
have to go soon. So
Okay,
let's like
cool.
kind of
Yeah,
close
there's
off
this
in the
whole
next few
like
minutes.
wolf whistling narrative that he like wolf whistles to white supremacist groups. Like that has been a narrative from the Democrat Party or from the left, and then on the flip side, I'm like, if we want a movement that unites American people, the reality of it is that it's going to include people who hold shitty beliefs. Like that's the reality of it.
Right.
And it doesn't seem to me that it doesn't seem like the left, we were talking about how the left is just the thing they're against in a new skin. The essence of the thing they're against in a new skin. Like they're basically like fucking shitty assholes themselves who are calling like the far right folks shitty assholes. So it's like
I should add the caveat: the leaders of it, because I think most Democrats are much more like soft than
nuanced. Yeah,
and
fair enough.
the people who are active on the internet. But
Right,
I think
yeah.
most of them are not assholes.
Yeah, fair
and
enough.
are great people.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'm specifically, I'm like getting contracted to into like the
Right.
far left.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's kind of bring this to. I think we went off a tangent. There's no clear end to that. Like, I
Right.
think there is something to be unpacked here possibly, but it's definitely one of those places when I'm like, like those trying to argue against he's a fascist claims has been one of the hardest for me. Like I don't necessarily see it. I read up about fascism, like I dug deep into it during my journey of coming to supporting Trump. Like I was like, let's see what fascism means. Let's see how he differs. And in some ways, where I've landed is that he's just an effective corporate leader, and to a numbed out political bureaucratic system, an effective corporate leader looks like a fascist because he's effective. Now whether he like wants to actually seize on, I think he wants to create a political family dynasty. Like that's where I've landed. Like that's the script, like the Kennedys and the Clintons and whatnot. That's the script.
I never thought of that.
That seems clear to me that he's gonna try and make sure Eric, Donald Jr., Barron, they all get into Ivanka, maybe they all get into politics.
Yeah.
But that's the script. That's his end goal in my mind, not like becoming a dictator. Like that's where I've landed. But it just seems impossible to. I found it very difficult to like really connect with someone who's like so certain that he's a fascist. It's just everything goes into what about fascism, and they don't even know what fascism is or like.
Yeah, I don't think that's a side goal. I think his end goal is literally to make America great again, and that's what he wants his legacy to be.
Interesting, yeah.
And I think he's said this many times, like he's going to be president for 4 years, and then he's not going to be president anymore.
Right.
And he's been grooming, J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr. He's been grooming a lot of successors.
Yeah.
And I don't think he even like has the slightest desire to be like. I think he would like actively not want to be dictator.
Yeah, how old?
That seems really stressful. He's 78.
How old was Hitler when he became the leader of Germany?
Well, probably 30 years younger. Yeah, I mean he wasn't that old. But just to say with the fascism thing, I roughly agree with you. I would just go further to say like to me it makes maybe more sense than to you why people would label him a fascist, given this perspective of like the system is basically okay. Not the system, but the political system, i.e. the Democratic Party and that machinery is basically doing a decent job of moving us towards a better society.
Right.
And in that frame, Trump coming in and destroying all that
Right.
it looks fascist for sure, and I understand that. And then the frame that I'm in, and that I would say you're in, and that I think most people supporting Trump are in, is no, actually that existing system is like deeply rotten, is a continuation of the shittiness,
Right.
and is like anti-American in the sense that it like is against the American citizen, and is instead in favor of this like abstract ideology. Maybe abstract's the wrong word, but this ideology very distant from like a literal person in a literal community. In practice, maybe in theory it's not, but in the way it shows up, it's so distant. And that's, I think, for me, the main argument of like why he's not a fascist is like, first you got to feel that truth, and then everything changes in terms of like how you see who and what he is, and what his behaviors, where they're coming from. Yeah, let's close at that.
Fair,
I do
yeah.
have to go,
Let's pause there for today. Yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. Yeah, leave thoughtful comments on the video if any come to you, and happy to take dissenting views presented thoughtfully. And then like, subscribe,
Don't forget to
share
like
if you
and
like
subscribe.
it.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right.
See ya.
Take care,
And
brother.
vote. Don't forget
Yeah,
to
please vote.
Yeah.
Please vote, and please
That's
vote
more
Trump.
important than, I mean, actually, it's not more important than talking about it, but it's also important. Yeah.
Take care.